Hey everyone, welcome to the Tought Pot. I've been thinking lately if we are truly a democracy based on some discussions that I've had with friends and family and some reading that I've done. And let me clarify my question. So, a democracy means rule by people. And what it really means is rule by general public of a country or a nation. And that's hardly what we see in our current system, which is the parliamentary democracy. If you understand a little bit and you search for terms like oligarchy, bureaucracy, aristocracy, and things like that, you would find that what we have as a system is at best an oligarchy, which is ruled by a few, or some sort of aristocracy, which is ruled by a certain elite of the society. And it's not ruled by people as democracy demands. While the people have equal rights to participate in the elections and run for the office if they meet the minimum eligibility criteria, they do not get a equal consideration or a fair and just consideration or even a level playing field by the system. The system is designed that way, and let me explain why. The system imposes a number of hurdles or obstacles for an everyday Joe if he wants to run for office, which the system doesn't pose on people that come from the minority of elites or aristocrats or professional politicians. And there are a number of these obstacles, but I'm just going to talk about three major constraints. One being the financial constraint, the second being the social constraint and the social aspect of it, and the third being the aspect of human bias that affects the democratic process in one way or another. So let's talk about the financial process first. In if you take a sample of the member of parliaments from the government of Canada, if you look at the Canadian Parliament and take a random sample of, if you take a if you take a snapshot of the Canadian Parliament, you would easily see that most of the member of parliaments are either established businessmen or high earning lawyers, doctors, surgeons, or professional politicians. This represents a very small portion of our national fabric. Represents a very small portion of our demographics. And it's easy to understand why it is like that. Because if you look at the average spending of each member of parliament during their campaign period, and let's say you take a look at either a member from the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party, which make the bigger portion of the Canadian Parliament, you would find that each of these members spent at least 90K to 110K in Canadian dollars during their campaigns. They had to take at least 6 weeks off to run the actual campaign. And this is only to theoretically. In the practical world, you would realize that if you're an everyday Joe who's new to politics, who doesn't have established presence, you would have to spend at least a year to 2 years campaigning full time to establish your presence. Not just that, as I said, you would have to have that kind of money, at least 90 to 110K to spare. And you don't just need the time and money to be invested in your political campaign. You also need a fallback plan in case you do not win the elections. Now, that's for the financial cost. When you talk about the social cost, you have to be someone with a very thick skin. You need to be ready for the online bullying, for the vitriol that goes on with these sort of campaigns from the political rivals, from other parties, and the general public at times, which is not easy to handle, to say the least. So what happens when you have member of parliaments making laws from only the well-off part of the society, from only the well-off portion of the society? What happens is our economic experiences determine our experiences in life in general, and our experiences in life in general influence how we make decisions. So these people are making laws and taking decisions that affect all the Canadians or all the general population with little to no understanding of the real experience of the general population of their lives. And last but not the least, I want to quickly touch on the factor of human bias. So Jagmeet Singh, who is currently the leader of the NDP, a political party in Canada, is not only a person of color, but also someone who wears a turban as a religious symbol on his head, faced a lot of high profile racism during his campaign, and his party lost a lot of seats. Now, it won't be fair to say that his party lost all of the seats because he was a person of color or he wears a turban, but for sure, if you look into the news and read a little bit, you would understand that it was a very big factor. And sometimes, that makes you think that how really could you have a level playing field for someone, um, uh, for everybody, regardless of their color, faith, um, education, financial status, and all of that. So all of those thoughts motivated me to read a little bit about the alternate forms of government that have been proposed in recent times. And one of the books that I read was Towards a New Socialism. Um, and that book offers a very interesting model of governance that, at least theoretically, seems to address all these concerns that I just shared with you guys, and offers a model that seems very close to a perfect form of democracy. So I reached out to the co-author of the book Towards the New Socialism that talks about this model of democracy, asking him to help me understand in a little more detail and in layman terms this proposed model of democracy that he talks about in his book. Mr. Paul Cockshott is a computer scientist and economist who has a multitude of books and papers written on these two subjects. And today I'm extremely honored that he's joining us to help us understand his proposed model of democracy and give it some serious thought. Mr. Paul Cockshott, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining us from Glasgow. I see it's a nice evening out there. You're sitting in your garden. If you could please help me understand the proposed model of democracy in your book, Towards a New Socialism, that we spoke about.
Well, the key principle that we put forward is, firstly, that major decisions should be taken by plebiscite or referendum. And since the book was written, me and colleagues at the Computer Science Department in Glasgow have done practical research on developing mobile phone voting apps that could be used for these purposes. It's a system called Handy Vote. Basically, it allows you to vote on yes-no issues, like do you want a particular law to come in, but it also lets you vote on quantitative issues, like what level of taxation should there be, how much should be spent on education, how much should be spent on libraries, how much should be spent on different things, and balances that against the levels of taxation that people want. So you can simultaneously vote on expenditure and on taxation, and it adds up the requests of everybody in the community and comes to a consensus position.
All right, and as compared to what we have right now is there's an MP that's been elected in the elections, and they pretty much make all the decisions or most of the decisions without this referendum.
They don't. One person makes the decision in Britain, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and I imagine the same, the finance minister makes a decision in Canada.
Correct. Yes, that is exactly the case. And if MPs vote, as I said, the MPs have a loyalty towards the party first, and then at the same time, they try to manage the expectations of their constituents, right? Which is not the greatest idea.
But the actual decisions are taken by maybe one person, perhaps consulting with the Prime Minister. So it's one or two people.
Right. So how do we exactly change that? In your book, you talk about Aristotle's idea of democracy. I think you talk a little bit about the Plato's republic as well, and you say that there should be councils as opposed to MPs. So I think
in the model described by Aristotle, decisions on expenditure are taken by the citizens as a whole. Since they were dealing with cities, they could just get everyone into the town square and vote on it. Obviously, nowadays you would have to do that electronically. In between, the day-to-day running of the state was done by council, and the council was elected by lot rather than by vote, so that each member of the electorate had the equal chance of being chosen to be on the council. And they used
Right.
random number voting machines to do it. Um, People had citizen cards made out of brass, since it was the Bronze Age, not out of plastic, with their names on them.
All
And
right.
they put them into a machine, and handles
Okay.
were turned, and it was decided who was going to be on the council on the basis of a random number generator.
That is very interesting, because that clearly addresses the points that I raised in the introduction of the show, that, there's a natural human bias. A lot of studies and research have been done that when we live our everyday lives, we as human beings are driven by emotion, by bias. And that bias can, range all over the place, from, ethnic bias, sexual bias, and so on and so forth. So that literally addresses that. Now, what you're saying is, instead of having an MP, there would be a whole body of council, let's say 5 to 10 representatives selected by a random vote. And then these
Yes.
people, these people collectively hold the power to decision making. And because they've
Well,
been...
they only hold the power to do things in between. Okay, the whole population sets the policy, and they then execute the policy. So they can't make
All right.
the ancient Greeks didn't allow the council, for example, to declare war. If there was going to be a
Understood.
declaration of war, everyone had to vote on it.
That's very interesting. But, in my discussions with some of the friends and other people, there's an argument that's put forward, and they say that running a government is not child's play. You need to know all these things. For example, you mentioned finance minister. He has a certain skill, experience, and expertise. And based on that, he makes a decision. Which is, supposedly the better decision, as opposed to a decision that the general public would make without having that skill, expertise, or experience. So don't you think that would hurt a democracy,
Well,
or that would hurt decision making?
firstly, there is no exam qualification to be an MP, and there shouldn't be any exam qualification for it. The question is whether a person who claims to be expert is really expert in interpreting what's in the interests of the majority of the population. Because
Correct.
the people who claim to be expert, they're drawn from a
Right.
narrow substratum of the population. And if you look at the British cabinet, they're all millionaires.
Understood.
As such, they really have very little feeling for the situation that the majority of the population are in. The majority of the population earns less than 26,000 a year. So
Yep.
millionaires they may be expert, but their weighting of what's important is going to be different from the average person's weighting of what's important.
Now that's a very good point. So I think you really clarify that the public's interest should take precedence over someone's expertise in the subject, because I could be the best businessman in the area, but if I have the capitalist mindset, I would always be thinking about making myself the biggest amount of profit and cutting everybody else's wages in the area.
Even if you're not individually corrupt like that, your upbringing and your social circle will influence what you think's important. And what you
Right.
think's important is not going to be the same as what the general electorate thinks is important.
That is right. And that's a very interesting point, because one of the things that I really enjoyed reading in the book Towards the New Socialism was how you broke down why the past experiments of socialism failed, so to speak, right? And I think there's a lot of a stigma attached these days. Whenever we talk about socialism to our friends and family, they're like, look at USSR, it kind of fell down, look at Venezuela and all that. But if you really break it down, you would understand that the causes of failure were not the model of socialism itself, but because they were run by a government that was either authoritarian in nature, like Joseph Stalin, or it was a problem of corruption, like in the time of Brezhnev. So by the model that you propose, if we have a democracy where really people are involved, I think it would solve that problem as well, because in that model, there's no authoritarianism, and I don't think there's a chance of corruption, because all the people are they come together in a council from a random lottery, right? Which means they don't know each other. They can't really collude with
They
each other
can't
because
collude,
nobody
no.
knows, right?
And they also are not career politicians. They're just citizens who, for a few months, are doing this as a duty. They're not in there like any professional politician is, which is to calculate how can I improve my career. They're
Right.
just there as ordinary citizens trying to say, what does it seem to me as an ordinary citizen? And by taking a random sample of the population, you make sure that all social groups, all sexes, both sexes, all racial groups are equally represented compared to their population weight. That kind of random sampling is what any opinion pollster would use if they wanted to find out what the opinion of the population is. They take a random sample. So it's the only scientific way to do it.
Understood. And that's very interesting. If I understand your model of democracy correctly, this takes off the burden of running a campaign from my shoulders, because being an eligible citizen, I'm already included in that lottery, right? I don't really have to run a campaign. I don't have to take days off from work. I don't have to spend money. I don't have to, know people of influence and so on and so forth. So that is a very interesting idea. There's really no burden on me.
There still would be campaigns. There would be, you would expect environmental groups to run campaigns. You'd expect various local interest groups to run campaigns for their locality. So there would be campaigns, but they would be campaigns in the same way that a wildlife protection group at the moment campaigns to win support in the public. It wouldn't be a matter of political campaigning. It would be trying to
Correct.
influence public opinion so that the random sample was likely to pick people who had the public opinion that you'd been pressing for.
Right. So you're saying the campaign would not be in favor or against a person, but in favor or against policies and procedures.
Yes.
So that's very interesting. And then how do political parties come in play? Because right now what happens is when I'm voting for my MP in the area, mainly I'm voting for my political party, right? Which kind of aligns with my political ideology, being it conservative, liberals, or social democrats, so on and so forth. So in your model of democracy, is there a party system?
Well, I think parties would still exist. They wouldn't be bodies which try and campaign for a group of politicians.
Okay.
But they might exist as bodies which try to influence public opinion.
All right. So that is very interesting and unique to me.
The existing parties, Quebec Independence Party, that campaigns for Quebec independence, but it would do it by trying to influence public opinion rather than by trying to get politicians elected.
Right, and that's very interesting and unique to me. I'm almost startled thinking about that, because that really makes a lot of things very interesting. That we go from favoring or going against a certain person to helping people really understand the issues, to influence people over actual issues.
Now, we've had a lot of experience of that in Britain, because we've had a whole series of referendums recently. And what's happened with these referendums is that you've had campaigns which don't necessarily line up with political parties. They're campaigning groups who campaign on it, but they're not identical to the political parties. The yes and no campaigns were not equivalent to the pre-existing political parties. They were organized around the issue.
So there's no political party in power, so to speak.
No.
It's always the public that's taking or tackling each issue separately. And I think if I'm getting you correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, one of the benefits of this is I do not have to compromise on any of my opinions or values. For example, I can, vote 70% of the time in favor of one thing that one political party stands for, but I do not have to compromise on the rest of the 30% of the issues that I do not agree with them on, right? And in
Correct.
those 30% of
Correct.
the cases, I can vote for, would vote for something that ideologically goes against that party.
I mean, to take the Brexit issue,
Right.
I voted to leave the European Union, even though
Hmm.
if it had been if there was an election, as there was an election a short while later, I would voted for the Labour Party. But the Labour Party was in favour of staying in the European Union.
Correct.
So people's policies on a referendum don't necessarily line up with their favourite party.
Awesome. Thank you very much. That is very interesting. And I'm pretty sure I learned a lot. And all right. So that was Mr. Paul Cockshott explaining his proposed model of democracy to us. I really enjoyed the episode. I really learned a lot and I feel enlightened. I'm honored that he joined us on the show. I'm really sorry that there was a lot of glitches in terms of audio and visual quality because of a bad internet connection that I'm having today. So I would try to quickly summarize the points that we talked about. So first off, he introduced his model of democracy by saying that it's not going to be a system of MPs, but rather a system of councils that are formed through a lottery that is drawn on the register of all eligible citizens. So that takes off the financial burden of an individual's shoulders, right? If you want to run for office, you don't really now need all the money and time that the current political system puts on your shoulders. All you got to do is submit your application form, show your interest, and you would be included in that register of people that the lot would be drawn on. And once the council is formed, people would be having referendums on major issues rather than giving the decision-making power to that council itself. The council would do the day-to-day work, and whenever there is a major decision to be made, a referendum would be held where the public would cast a vote. We talk about how someone needs skills, expertise, and experience in a certain area to make decisions in that area. But the idea here is that regardless of the skills, expertise, and experience, if a person does not belong to a certain group or does not represents the national fabric, their decision cannot guarantee that interest of the general public. So the interest of the public would take precedence over someone's skills, expertise. So the interest of the general public would take precedence over what someone believes to be the better decision based on their own experience, which is driven by their economic circumstances. So that is profound. I mean, think of a place where you can run for office without spending a lot of money, without having to invest a lot of time, and only get to the office when you get selected in that council. The second issue that it addresses is the issue of the human bias. Now, because you're not voting for one person, your bias cannot really affect the process because it's a lot. So from that lot, everybody, regardless of their faith, color, ethnic background, so on and so forth, has an equal opportunity of getting selected through that random lottery. And the most interesting thing that I liked about it is that in this new model of democracy, you're not restricted to voting for a party that your interests only align, that. And the most interesting thing that I liked about this is that there won't be a party in power. There would be councils that are managing or running the country. It'll always be the public in power taking decisions or voting on policies. And the most in, and And the most interesting thing about this model of democracy is there won't be any party in power. It's always going to be the public that's in power, and it's going to be voting on issues separately as opposed to voting for a party that then makes decisions. And some of those decisions might not be the decisions that you would want to make as general public. So it doesn't put you in a spot where you have to vote for a party that only aligns with you on a 70% or 80% level, and then you are compromising on the rest of the 20% of what that party stands for because you don't. In this case, you can really stand for exactly what you value the most, what you think is the right thing to do on every single issue. So in one of the so you can be voting basically for something that one party is in favor of, um, at one point, and on the other. And the most interesting thing about this model is there won't be any party in power. And you are not forced to vote for a party that you don't see eye to eye with on every single issue, which is pretty much the case all the time. You vote for a party that maybe, currently what happens is you vote for a party, and that party may be uh, and currently that's the problem. You have, let's say, three major parties running for elections, and each of these party only align at a certain level with your ideology or your values. So let's say party A, party B, and party C. And party A only says 30% of what you think is the right thing to do, and the 70% that they say is something that you don't agree with. And then party B is like a 50-50, and party C, um, the and then in turn, and then in case of party C has, and then in case of party C, your ideology aligns with them at 70%. So you end up voting for that party knowing that 30% of the things that they would do are not the things that you would want, are not the things that you agree with. But in the new proposed form of democracy that Mr. Paul Cockshott was discussing, you would not be forced to vote for a party and compromise on 30% or even 10% of the issues that you stand for on a different side, because every time you would be voting for a separate issue at a time, as opposed to giving charge to the party, letting them make all the decisions for you. So I really hope this was a great episode. It was a really new and fresh perspective for everybody. And I hope if you don't agree with anything at all, it at least starts some interesting conversations and give you something to think about. I would love to hear your thoughts about this. Even if it's a disagreement, I would love to listen to that. I always think that you learn a lot from people who disagree with you because they offer you a new perspective and a new angle as well. I just request everybody to be respectful of everybody else's views here. Thank you very much. Till next time, God bless. All the best.